Detroit, new film by Catherine Bigelow, who I think is a very, very interesting filmmaker. Near Dark is one of my favourite films. I absolutely love it. So Detroit, which is set amidst the riots in Detroit, July 1967. What's happened is that Catherine Bigelow and her screenwriter, journalist turned screenwriter Mark Bowl have got together again to take a true story, which they have fictionalized, mixing fact and fiction to tell the story as a sort of cinematic experience. So what we get is at the beginning there is a raid on a speak. Firstly, actually, we get sort of an animated history lesson talking about the Great Migration, talking about the move from the rural south to the industrialized north, contextualizing absolutely that you have this situation in which you have basically poverty-ridden ghettos in which there's a mainly white police force, and the phrase that's used at the beginning is which inequality is a dream, or equality is a myth, and change is inevitable. So against that background, very specifically trying to locate the film in a sort of social context. There is a raid on a speakeasy. The raid is carried out with an unnecessary level of brutality and humiliation. It spills out onto the streets. The next thing, rioting begins, and over the course of the next few days, police, National Guardsmen, state troopers move in, and several blocks become the centre of this rioting. We then meet Algie Smith's character Larry Reid, who is singing with a band who have a gig at the Fox Theatre, which suddenly has to be the Dramatics, which suddenly has to be cancelled because the theatre has to be closed because of the rioting. Very moving moment in which he steps out onto the stage and sings a verse of a song a cappella, to the empty auditorium, which is very, very haunting. Then he and his friend, realizing that they're cut off by the rioting, take refuge in the Algiers Motel, where the action actually really starts to focus. So we go from this large, sprawling canvas, starting from history, social history of the 20th century, then down to the city, then down to the blocks, and then closing in on the motel where this notorious incident, in inverted commas, took place, which then became sort of emblematic of the flashpoint of broiling racial tension in America. The film has some extraordinary performances, not least John Boyega as Melvin Dismukes, who is a security guard who is working across the way. When the police arrive at the Algiers, they decide that they think they've been shot at, that there's a sniper, and they're going to the Algiers to go and seek out a sniper. John Boyega, his character Melvin, sees them arriving, sees the National Guard arriving, and he finds himself caught between two sides. The first thing he attempts to do is to make peace, to make nice with the National Guard.
Hey, fellas. Melvin Dismukes. I'm with United Security. I'm guarding that grocery store across the street. I come bearing gifts.
Oh, thank you. That's nice boys. Hey, all things considered, this is pretty good.
Thank you. I don't have my usual appliances.
Oh, you got any sugar?
I don't push it, man.
So what then happens is he finds himself caught between, on the one hand, brutalizing police who have decided that they are going to find the sniper in this building, and they take a bunch of people that they are then going to interrogate using the most brutal and horrendous means, something which is referred to as a death game, something which appears initially to be a game, but you can tell very, very early on that this is going to be, it's going to end very, very badly. And leading this is a character, Krauss, who is a fictionalized character played by Will Poulter, who is described by the screenwriter as inspired by the recorded actions and deeds of a Detroit police officer. And he is basically leading this horrendous interrogation. And as the film comes down into this one corridor, it moves through genres. It starts as sort of social history. It then moves into something which is very like docudrama. It has this musical sequence, almost musical fantasia. And then it moves into its sort of core act, which sees it stepping back into the territory of horror, which Catherine Bigelow has explored before in Near Dark, which is a kind of vampire western. Will Poulter is absolutely brilliant. I mean, John Boyega is fabulous because John Boyega is playing this character who is caught between these three warring sides and finds himself looked upon with contempt and distrust by everybody. And there is something of the young Denzel Washington in his performance, the ability to portray really acute emotions through the tiniest facial gestures, not through words, but through, I mean, I'm always impressed by the physicality of the actors that I like the best. Are actors who are in very physical performances, and John Boyega his face is so expressive, and he telegraphs so much with these tiny gestures. You can see all these warring elements going on in his character. As far as Will Poulter's character Krauss is concerned, what he does is treads a very thin line between being, on the one hand, just a caricatured, racist, bullying cop, and on the other hand, being somebody who has these sort of flashes of what, looks like, when you first meet him, for example, he doesn't just come on as a sort of snarling evil. There's a strange sort of facade of innocence above it. And I have to say, I think Will Poulter is a brilliant actor, and I think he's really, really terrific in this, and I think he plays it really well. The film is shot by Barry Ackroyd, who many people will know of as being Paul Greengrass's cinematographer. I've just done a Kermode Uncut blog with Paul Greengrass. And Barry Ackroyd is the person who does that thing, which has now become very much part of cinema, of making you feel that what you're watching is almost like a documentary. I mean, it's a it's a drama, it's a fictionalization, it's actors playing parts, but there's something about the aesthetic of it. And he's using vintage lenses on digital cameras, which are placed around the sort of central corridor, around the central room, to give full coverage so that the actors are basically being caught from wherever they're. So obviously what's happening is, the actors are all, I have to say, across the board at the top of their game. They are all very, very convincing. You can believe that they're completely immersed in their characters. I think what Bigelow manages to do, firstly, is to demonstrate that she's extremely dexterous at moving between genres. She is a director who has always done that. She won she made history by winning the Best Director Award for The Hurt Locker. She's also always been an immersive director. What she believes in, and I interviewed her first, back in the times of Near Dark and Strange Days, and she was always talking about, the immersive experience of cinema. You see Point Break, it throws you into those chase sequences. It throws you out of a plane with Keanu Reeves. If you see Strange Days, it toys with virtual reality. And she has actually recently made a virtual reality film about the ivory poachers and people that protect elephants. And it's it's a short piece, which I haven't seen. I really want to, because I love the idea of Catherine Bigelow actually working with virtual reality. But what she's trying to do is to put you in the middle of this. And I think what she does brilliantly, and her editors, hats off to them, have done a really good job of negotiating this move from wide story down to something which absolutely becomes a horror movie. Now, I know some people have taken against the fact that that section of it is a horror movie. I don't take against it for that at all. I think horror is one of the highest genres, and when used to the right ends, is very powerful. And the other thing I'd like to say about the film is that it seemed very, very contemporary, despite the fact that its period setting is excellently evoked. It seemed to be a film that was chillingly contemporary. It's interesting that I've seen this in the same year as a film like Get Out. It's a film that seemed urgent and seemed absolutely not a timepiece, not a period piece, not something which is bookended, even though the film itself actually has a kind of bookending structure in which we go on beyond the initial incidents. And I thought it was a very powerful piece of cinema with terrific performances. As I said, Algie Smith and John Boyega and Will Poulter, to name but a few, and very urgently captured by its cinematographer, brilliantly knitted together by the editors. And for me, a very powerful and visceral experience.